This is a series. It's beginning a series of videos around, or webinars around, playing to your strengths during this time of stress, and how doing that can not only help reduce the stress, help you recover, but to help you focus even more. So let me just share a little bit of my journey getting to this point and why we're doing this webinar. So on March 12th, I was on vacation with my family in South Padre Island, down South Texas. And we began to hear about this virus. And at the time, it really didn't register to me very much until I went to the local H-E-B grocery store for some supplies. While I was in the grocery store, I noticed that the whole dairy aisle was completely empty. So caught my attention. We drove back home, and then on March 20th, I started getting my first series of cancellations. And at first it was just irritating to me. So I'm prepping you that I'm beginning to go through Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. So at first I didn't think, well, we'll get through this in a month or so. It's just a virus and it's in China and no big deal. Probably like a lot of people. And then it's irritation. Why are these people canceling? Then it went through a little bit of, maybe I can bargain. That's the next item after anger and frustration. So if I lowered my price, if we delayed it a bit, but none of that worked. I hit the deep part of despair somewhere around the second week of April. And after the second week of April, 95% of my revenue for 2021 was absolutely gone. And with it, my entire business model. And my business model was getting on an airplane on Mondays, flying out, performing, consulting, advising, and then coming home Thursday or Friday. So now I'm in a mode of having to reinvent. Now, during this time, I've got a son in college. I've got a daughter planning for a wedding. Our father-in-law is living with us in his late stages. So there's a lot going on in our household. But having been through this before and knowing certain techniques or certain principles that I'm going to share with you that have helped me, and they're not necessarily the only principles, there's certainly others, but they've worked for me, so I'm sharing it through that lens. I pivoted very quickly, and now 4 or 5 months later, my business is on track to do as much or more than it had, but it's a completely different model. The learning curve has been steep. Now, I set out a goal during this time that I would come out of this more resilient in 5 key areas of my life. And these are areas I monitor consistently. 1, how's the family doing? And we're much better. I mean, I'm home. The biggest impact for my wife is I wash dishes every night. So that's been a boom, to be able to be home and shut things off at a particular time, and then just spend time with my wife or my son when he's around. Number 2, physically. I determined I would be better. Now, I've consistently worked out, but I haven't missed a day. Well, I've missed 5 days of playing tennis. Now, when I say playing tennis, it's actually just hitting some tennis balls against a high school wall. But I do that every day. And at the end of the day, I'll shut down at 4:30 and go and hit some tennis balls against the wall. Mentally and spiritually, we've been taking at least a full day just to unwind, to think, to read, to reflect. So that's part of our process here. Business and financially. Now, we've gone through a little bit of an up and down here, but we're on a strong upswing. And then, of course, relationally. Those were the 5 key areas I said I wanted to come out more resilient, not just stronger, but more resilient at the other side. Now, part of what I've been practicing are 6 keys to what's called post-traumatic growth. Now, I'm going to key in on one of those, and that's number 2 for this webinar. And then in the series, I'll be covering the others. But those 6 include having a positive mindset and looking at it, not being optimistic, but being positive that whatever I'm going to go through, I'm either going to learn about it, get stronger. I've made a lot of mistakes in learning some of these new practices of online. I mean, we made a lot of mistakes this afternoon getting ready for this webinar. And so we're constantly in that learning mode. And so that's part of having the positive mindset, is being curious, being open, being willing to try and come back and try again, but knowing that the process is going to make us better. Number 2, playing to my strengths. So that's what this webinar is going to focus on, playing to my strengths. Now, my top strengths are strategic, achiever, relator, learner, connectedness. Those 5 strengths are the ones that I've really played to and tried to play to them every single day. And we'll talk about the science of why that is vital. It leaves me rejuvenated, and I'll talk to you about what happens chemically to you when you do play to your strengths. The third element in post-traumatic growth is tightening vital relationships. Now, I'm going through this and walking through this with a cohort of people that I'm partnering with, learning from, checking in with, and who are checking in with me. That's vital in times of crisis, that you don't get isolated, that you don't feel like you've got to do this all by yourself. Number 4, sleep and recovery. I have doubled down and making sure I'm consistent with this. That will be a webinar all by itself. Life by design and on purpose. Why am I doing things? And doing things intentionally, getting rid of the noise, getting rid of the busyness, and really designing what my days look like. And then get stuff done. Don't get confused by activity versus getting things done. I'm creating tangible things on a daily basis that are part of a long-term plan. Now, post-traumatic growth came out of research with the military, with soldiers coming back with PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And what happens in post-traumatic stress syndrome is that your amygdala, your vigilant side, is on all the time. It's called hypervigilance. It's hyper, fight, or flight. And everything gets translated through that. And there's something in your brain called the default mode network. In other words, your thinking defaults to this certain pattern in your brain created by the trauma that takes you back to that moment again. And it's like reliving it, and it completely shuts down your ability to think or focus and move forward. Now, a small percentage of soldiers came back stronger because of the results. And Dr. Martin Seligman, who did the research, called this post-traumatic strength syndrome. Others are calling it post-traumatic growth. So now in my coaching, I'm including these strategies and techniques with all of the people I'm coaching to help them get through this. I'm coaching more than 50 people right now and have been through this period of time. And I'm finding how draining it is. The common narratives are, I don't know that I'm making progress on a daily basis. Things change often. I feel isolated. I can't see the end in mind. I can't see the goals. The mountain I thought I was climbing isn't there. I don't feel challenged. All of these things are draining. I was just on a 2-hour coaching session with a team in California talking about why they felt so drained. And we went through their strengths, and they're talking about the drain. And it goes back to learning how to shift and apply those same strengths to areas that you do have control over. It's called agency. And so agency is very important. There are things we have control over. We have control over our mindset, we have control over our behavior, and we have control over where we can direct our strengths. So why are we going through all of this? Let me give you a little bit of context of what's happening. And this was a big aha for me about 3 months ago when I was talking to Dr. Jernigan, and his practice, he's a clinical psychologist. His practice is called the Hidden Valley Practice in Southern California. They are world leading experts in what's called mass disaster recovery. They got their start working in war-torn areas in Africa in 4 countries with genocide. And there's a certain pattern of psychological impact that groups of people go through. It's somewhat similar to the 5 stages of grief, but it's a cumulative effect. And I'll walk through those stages for you. I was so caught by his analogy, I asked him to partner with me to help build a model for companies to see the lens of bringing people back to work through that paradigm or framework of mass disaster recovery, recognizing that people are going to process through this emotional stress that they've gone through in different ways, but through a predictable pattern. He said the same thing happened in 9/11, Katrina, and other mass disasters. And the process can last up to 10 years before a population gets back to some sense of calm and normalcy. And it is also passed to the other generation as well. So I won't get into some of the social implications in this webinar, but we're really examining this and looking at some of the long-term consequences, not only for companies, but for our nation as well. So the 6 stages of a mass disaster. There's the pre-disaster. Probably your most common model or framework for this is a hurricane. There's a warning or a watch that turns into a warning. And so sometimes we know what to do, sometimes we take it seriously, sometimes we don't. Then there is the impact or the shock of this. So for me, I had early warning of this coming when I was on Padre Island, but I didn't really have context to take it seriously. So I brushed it off in that denial phase. And then the impact and the shock by mid-April to my system, my livelihood, my business, and all of the questions that I had. So with that, I'm going through this phase of impact and shock. And that's where a lot of people begin to go into those 5 stages of grief: the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the despair, and then on the other end is what we call the adventure, that reconciliation, the past, the worst is over, and I'm freed up now to be open, creative, and see what's next. All companies are going through something called the heroic phase, and we're starting to get at the end of that heroic phase. It usually is only a couple weeks, but this heroic phase is unique. It's been lasting more than 90 days. During this heroic phase, with the adrenaline and the fear that people are experiencing, people tend to step up. They tend to work more. So some companies have been seeing this as a sign as they shifted to work from home or remote work or lockdown, shifting work there. They've seen that productivity levels have maintained themselves pretty well. And so with this, I think they've gotten a false reading that, oh my goodness, this is an easy, no-brainer future strategy for us to follow. We're now starting to find that what they're starting to see is beginning to break down because it was never sustainable. It was done under this heroic phase. So there are a lot more things that we need to learn about remote work and the unique stressors of working remotely and working through this medium of virtual communication that we haven't fully understood yet, and we don't know how to manage. There's more self-care needed. So now we're starting to see what we're moving into. I think for some of my clients in the last month or so has been this honeymoon phase. Government stimuluses are out. There's been some stabilization. We're in the summer thinking COVID is going to dip a little bit. And so there's thinking about what's next in a positive way, not what's next into what could hit us next, but what's next and let's start getting ready and ramp up. So you've seen a lot of companies begin this ramp up, some saying we'll start in the fall, we'll start in September, but now we're moving into the next stage, and that's called disillusionment. When our hopes begin to get buffeted, when we get new setbacks, when people are tired and running on fumes, and then you get a setback, then you go into what's called this disillusionment phase. And we're right now beginning the first parts of that. And then once you get through and stabilize in this disillusionment phase, then you begin the recovery. So you can see some similar parallels between the mass disaster stages and the Kubler-Ross. And here's what's happening and what I'm seeing as I'm coaching people and how it's affecting them. First of all, this whole thing, we're all feeling somewhat stress fatigued, running on adrenaline, doing it for a long period of time. Working from home is another new stressor. It's new to us. So think of anything that's new and not habituated yet as taking more cognitive load than normal. And cognitive load is another word for stress. So even though some enjoy working from home, the habits and the routines are not in. So it is more work, and therefore stressful. For some, income has been disruptive or job security is uncertain. That's another stressor. The social unrest has been stressful for many. The virus itself and the people we know who have had the virus or the fear of the virus. The media cycling, that's, if I don't want to get on the soapbox, but you got to stop watching major news and media to really understand what's going on and start finding some fact-based or evidence-based sources to track the kind of leading indicators that are important for not only business, for us to know how to navigate this thing. The general uncertainty creates stress. And then one of the things I would like to suggest that you do is assess where you might be on those 4 stages of grief, or the 5 stages of grief. The 4 are kind of going into the valley, and the 5th is that moving out into that adventure. And if you'd like to read about it, I have a blog on my website on why business leaders are going through those 5 stages of grief. So now I'd like to pause, and we're going to start moving in how all this applies to playing to your strengths. But I'd like for us to take a poll, and I'm going to add a poll here. And hold on, it's going to force me to do these polls in order, maybe. Let's see if I can do, no, I can do, so we're going to have a poll to describe your average day, and I'm going to launch the poll. So describe how work motivates you, okay? Does it create a spark of enthusiasm almost every day? Are you good at what you do, and so you enjoy that part of work? You don't mind work. You don't mind the work that you're doing. And number 3, or the last one, my work absolutely drains me. So we'll take a couple minutes and just see how that comes in. All right, 80% of you have voted and it's in. So most of you are saying, I'm good at what I do and I enjoy that. 24, so that's 49%. 24% said, what I do every day creates a spark of enthusiasm. The last two is I don't mind what I do for work and my work drains me. That's about 11%. Part of the question is, if you're playing to your strengths, then that will create a spark for you every day. Some of us has settled in, and because of we're good at what we do, we enjoy that part, but that's different than being able to play to your strengths. You've developed skill, capability, competency. Those are all very motivating. But there's a whole different level of energy when you're doing what you're good at and also tapping into your strengths. So one of the questions that I'm going to ask and have you think about, are you pushing rope uphill? You know, are you feeling drained? Now, I'll give you two examples. I started college in vet medicine. I wanted to be a vet because I loved animals. What I found is that I was lousy at calculus and organic chemistry. It drained me. It drained me so much that I dreaded going to class. And I couldn't tell you, well, I can tell you, it was not only the content of the class, but the fact that my teaching assistant who taught the class could barely speak English. So not only was it hard enough, but I had a hard time understanding. I shifted to a major of big ideas. Now, I didn't have the Clifton Strengths at that time. It wasn't developed until the year 2000. But I naturally shifted to something and tapped into, and I loved it. In fact, it was the foundation of all the books that I've written since that time. And two things: one, big ideas, that's strategic. And I was mentored by one professor. I had one professor for 2.5 years, my relator strength and building that deep trust. So those played to my strength. And because of that, I loved my major and it has stayed with me since. Now, I started my career in 1978 at Southwestern Bell as a project manager. Now, I was competent as a project manager. So that was that. I liked the fact of being competent. I didn't enjoy all the details and the budget numbers and the reconciliations and counting pieces and parts. I hated that. But what I shifted to that I learned to love is selling at a conceptual level. I sold the big ideas of flexibility and productivity and those kinds of concepts. But I had a good grounding, so I appreciated the grounding I got in order to sell. So those are examples of, you may like the fact that you're competent, but what I'd like to help you do is find a road, even if you stay doing what you're doing, on how to play to your strengths. And hold on a second. Poll number 2 is to pick some things and describe some things that just drain the living daylights out of you about work. So now we're going to dig in and dive a little deeper and look at the place that you currently spend most of your time and try to reverse engineer what drains you into how you might be able to play to your strengths and find engagement in that. So here are the results. The winner is at 44%, the politics, and that's draining. And so I'll show you which specific strengths that those drain. And then getting dragged into the weeds. That for me is very draining because strategic, one of my cognitive strengths, is a high level. And I want to set the end in mind, start with the end in mind and just begin moving, strategic and achiever. I hate politics. That's my relator, truth to power. I don't like hidden agendas. And I can sense my relator strength has a very strong BS meter. So those two things would drain me as well. Shooting from the hip tends to be those who like to take action and figure it out as you go. I'm okay with that. That doesn't drain me that much, but that can drain some people who are more about, let's get the plan right before we begin to launch it. And then the all work, no play. I don't relate to this at all. I'm all work. My wife knows that. But there are some motivational strengths that bring that positive energy, that naturally praise and recognize people, that naturally coach and nurture, or that set high goals and elevate a team's energy. There's some natural strengths around that. Now, there's only 6 out of the 34 strengths that are in that category. So it's interesting to see that that's the smallest number of people who responded to that. So first of all, I want to show you why it's not necessarily what you do that determines your engagement or your motivation, but it's how you apply your strengths. So there's a myth out there that we need to be in pursuit of what lights our fire, our passion. That's really bad advice, because thousands and thousands of people have left what they're doing in pursuit of trying to find something out there that they're going to be passionate about. But we are wired to be passionate about the things that we're passionate about, playing to our strengths. And the Gallup Clifton Strengths, or the Gallup Strengths Finder, it's now called Clifton Strengths, what it identifies is what you naturally do best and enjoy most. And the research shows that it doesn't determine what you'll do well at, it determines whatever you're doing, how you'll do well or how you'll enjoy it most. So that's the great news in this. You don't have to go and leave what you're doing unless you absolutely hate the environment or absolutely hate what you're doing. So I want you to understand that if you're in that good at what I do and that's what I like about what I do, then you can begin to look at your Clifton strengths and begin to play more, doing what you're doing, playing more and more to your strengths. I was not a traditional style of salesperson. I'm not a big fan of, quote, selling. What I am a fan of is really deeply understanding what somebody's problem is. That's my learner strength, curiosity. I really enjoy becoming a subject matter expert on the client and their business. That's my input. I really like strategic, sorting through, getting to what the end game could be or should be quickly. I really enjoy accomplishment, getting it done. Those are the things I enjoy. I just happened to apply it to the sales environment I was in, and I did quite well doing that. But I didn't fit the normal cold calling. I invented my own model of business development called SWARM, Smart Work and Referral Marketing, which is a cohort. That's my relator strength. The smart work is strategic. I don't want to have to cold call 100 people to find 3. I don't want to go to networking sessions because I'm a relator. I'd rather talk to 1 or 2 people deeply than work the room. So knowing how to adapt your strengths is great. So the good news is most of you will be able to make this adjustment quite easily. Let's talk about what is a strength so we know what a strength is. Biologically, a strength is a synaptic cluster in your brain. These are your neural pathways in very tightly woven clusters, and they create this reinforcing network that allows what's called neuroplasticity. They reinforce each other and they learn. So in other words, when you feed one of those neural pathways, it's also reinforcing those in the cluster. So that's why the research shows that you learn faster, you grow better by playing to your strengths. Conversely, if you try to fix something that's not a strength, you have very few connected neurons, very, very low level of density between your neurons. So when one neuron gets strengthened, for example, empathy is my bottom strength. When I try to care, it's work. But I have other ways of playing to my strengths to do the same kind of work that empathy instinctively does, just not as fast. It would be the difference between speaking the language of empathy as a first language or getting there as a second language. And the way I do that is, again, my learner is my curiosity about people, my relator, and then getting to the heart of things through strategic. And all I have to do when I'm at home is just be careful that I don't click on that achiever side and want to fix something. I need to condition myself that I've got 4 options. We've determined I have 4 options when my wife is frustrated. One option is I can fix it. That's the achiever, strategic achiever. That option's never on the table. Option number 2, I can listen. So I've got to be very deeply into my learner input strengths to be curious and be there. The fourth, let's see, one, two. The third one is I can go away and come back, let things, so I have to make sure my strategic and achiever aren't so wanting to bring closure so quickly that I give it breathing room. And then the last one, if I'm totally confused, I have no clue what I intend to do or how to help, I can give my wife a hug, and that's the equivalent of a white flag. So we use these. So the lesson here is that don't try to fix a strength. Let's use the strengths that you have to make your gaps irrelevant. Now, when you're operating in your strengths, these are intrinsically, they release energy in your body. They're intrinsic. In other words, they're internal to you, and they're valuable just in and of themselves. There's no external thing you've got to accomplish. Just by being curious and learning, that's energizing for me. And when you're in the mode for some end game, they release dopamine. And if you're in it for an extended period of time using your strengths, then those endorphins kick in. So this is the secret to staying recharged during stressful times, is making sure that when you're in the mode of work or activity or meeting with people, that you're operating in those strengths as much as you can. So again, we talked about why it really doesn't pay to focus on weaknesses. And that's the hardest thing for me to overcome, because I was raised in a performance-oriented mindset all through school, through tennis, in my family, in Boy Scouts. If I wasn't achieving, that was my primary mode. Accomplishment was the primary mode, and fixing and making, working on weaknesses is a focus. So that's been a long evolution for me. It'll be an evolution for you as well. So understanding energy fields. So we just started intimating about energy fields, and I'm going to bring up the third pole and help you get introduced into this whole concept that the different modes of strengths actually create energy fields. And those energy fields are a key and a secret to how to play to your strengths. Okay, so here's the question. Your learning style, how do you best learn? Do you best learn by thinking out loud, reading and thinking, learn by doing, or learn by teaching in front of others? Okay, learning by doing, number one, okay? Number two, reading and thinking. Number three, thinking out loud. And number four, learn by teaching. So I'm going to directly apply this to the Clifton strengths and to a system that we use called Core Clarity. This is called the Core Clarity Key. It takes the 34 strengths from Gallup and puts them into 4 language quadrants. I also call these energy fields. The upper left, the blue, are the relationship strengths. And these are intuitive, instinctive around the nonverbal elements that make relationships work. When you're operating in these, then they're energized and engaged, but they're also the easiest ones to drain, the ones that drain the fastest and the deepest. Now, if you had answered that you like to think out loud with others, then it was likely that this is the energy field you'll feel rejuvenized in. Now I'll go down to the orange quadrant. Well, I'll stick with the top. The magenta are the motivational strengths. Those are the 6 strengths that are instinctive around seeing potential in someone or something, and then motivating it or elevating it to reality. This is the one that you would be most likely to say, I love to get in front of others and teach. Notice this has the fewest number of strengths, and notice it was the least accounted for in the poll. Going down to the left, those are the cognitive strengths, how you take in information, process, and make decisions. Now, these 2 on the bottom are internal. They switch on with activity inside your body and brain. The other two are stimulated by external means through people. The blue is more relationship, and the magenta is more group interactive in terms of the switch getting turned on, that intrinsic energy. The bottom are internal. Just think about think and do. If you were to say read and reflect, that would have been the green or the cognitive. If you were to have said the get it done, that's the orange. Orange is the energize, and those are the instinctive strengths around getting something started or completing it. So now we have a process, a framework for seeing where we get motivated, where we get energized, and then also where we might get drained as well. So I want to give you some examples of that. So I'm going to share with you a story of my son and I. All right, so you can see this chart of my family. Now in the quadrants, notice where most of my family is. We're in the green quadrant. So that means a lot of our energy is in thinking and imagining and not talking a lot around the house. Now notice my son Nathan. He's got 3 blue strengths. So here's how this works. He traveled with me for a couple of years. We were doing workshops together. We were coming off of a workshop and we got in the car, and my son was working behind the scenes all day, making sure all the materials were out, cleaning up, helping people with questions, making sure people had pens, doing all that kind of workshop support. At the end of the day, we're in the car driving to the hotel. I go quiet. Then my son says, "Dad, why do you go from engaged dad in the workshop to boring dad in the car?" And I said, "Gosh, that's a great question. Let me think about it." Well, here's what I think. First of all, I have 1 blue strength and I have the 1 orange strength. I had a job to do, which was to deliver training to a group of people. And when I'm done, I didn't want to talk to anybody again. So I went into my head, those 3 green strengths of strategic input and learner. And that's what I was doing in my car, just replaying things. However, my son was drained most of the day because he wasn't interacting and relating to people. He was just getting things done, doing behind the scenes work. So he wanted to rejuvenate. His natural way of rejuvenating was to go into his 3 blue, which is to talk, connect, to joke around. Ideation plus communication. That's kind of the joker combination. So realizing what was going on, I was able to shift. My strategic was able to shift. I had a new goal, strategic, to connect with my son, my relator, to build a better relationship. But I was able to I was really drained and tired, but I was able to recharge my batteries by moving into something that was just, I didn't even have to think about. My curiosity mode, my learner mode. What did you think? Who did that? What would you do differently? What kind of feedback would you give me? That's natural, second nature. Remember, those strengths you have are so intrinsic, it's just second nature. And when and if you can switch that mode on, it recharges you. So that was a big aha. When my wife and I like to just relax, you can see Lisa has 5 green strengths. So if you've ever seen the movie Inception, that's her brain for the most part. And she's got these worlds within worlds. So quality time is sitting next to each other. She's reading and thinking and scribbling. I'm reading as well. And one of the things I discovered very early on when we were just discovering these things about 12 years ago, my little achiever brain was on during the time when I was sitting next to her. I thought I would be discreet, get up from the couch, go into my office, write something down, and then quietly sneak back. The third time I did that, she looked at me and she said, whatever's going on in that achiever brain of yours, either you go do it until you're done and don't come back until you can sit for 90 minutes. So that immediately drained my achiever. Uh, I felt that stress, and that's part of what you can tell when you're drained is it can feel stressful. And so I felt that stress, but then I reshifted. Oh, a new goal. Sit for 90 minutes. I can do that. So strategic and achiever kicked in. And now I've reshifted energy. And that's the point on how do you know where you're at, your fuel tank of energy. And then how do you reshift and recharge that energy in real time? And everybody can do that if you know where your primary mode is and you just move into that mode. I've got hundreds of examples like that in real time with workshops. In fact, I'm going to bring up one more share. And this is a leadership team. In fact, this is the team I was working with earlier today. And so we were talking to this team about their areas of recovery. Now notice I've drawn lines on where to look for dominant places of recovery, and see the 4 circles in the upper part look very similar. They both have blue, green, and orange, but we can see that they have different numbers in each, where the first 3 have 2 blue and 2 orange strengths. I mean, two blue, 2 green strengths, 1 orange, and the last one, 3 green and 1 orange. So those that have the blue and green combination, they have a little bit of a combination of reflective, thoughtful times with people. And then if you look at the one on the far right, you can see there, this person pretty much wants to be left alone. Thinking time, getting something done. That's where most of the energy is. They can also shift to that thoughtful time with others. They also have that combination of the green and the blue, but it's really dominant in their head. That's their recovery time. The next one below it with the blue and the orange, getting things done with people is energizing. So we can really boil this formula for rejuvenating into real simple one-liners. Getting things done with others is that blue-orange. Then we've got the green-orange, which is the circle below. And again, leave me alone, no blue, no magenta. Let me think through things and get stuff done. And now we've got the 2 stabilizers. And the stabilizer, what makes it distinct, there's 22% of the database with stabilizer. What makes that distinct is the fact that there's strengths in all 4. So they're very adaptable, very flexible. And so fitting in, depending on where the emphasis is on the relationship, or here on, that's the blue, or the magenta is in the group dynamic. This profile likes to be with others in groups because it is the one leadership archetype that is naturally designed to improving how people interact together. So being that facilitator, being that person that brings people together, that oils the gears, is the glue, that's what is rejuvenating for stabilizers. They would hate to be by themselves during this particular period of time. So I've given you kind of a high level look at how we go about looking at where you might find recovery. So I'd like to begin to summarize and then lay the seeds for the next webinar. So first, what I'd like to recommend for you is take an honest inventory of how you're doing right now, where you might be in the 5 stages of grief, whether you're struggling or you're in that denial phase or anger phase, or you're all the way through to that adventure. Look at your physical and mental health. Are you tired? Are you getting enough sleep? Now, a lot of things that look like behavior issues or performance issues oftentimes are simply a lack of sleep. We recently did research on education, one of the big ahas for us with students, that adolescent students have a different circadian rhythm than adults. They tend to go to bed or are ready for bed 2 hours later than adults. So when they're getting up at 6 a.m. to go to school, that's the equivalent of waking us up at 3 a.m. The research is showing that a lot of these kids that are having performance issues or are showing symptoms that look like ADD, it's 50% they're estimating are sleep deprived, not ADD. Sleep is such a vital part to allowing you to play to your strengths, to giving you that presence of mind to know that what I was able to do with my son and shift gears. If you're tired, it's going to be really hard. And then you're going to get, instead of a virtuous cycle of recharge, you're just going to start getting into a vicious cycle of drain and try to stimulate yourself, lack of sleep, and drain again. I'd recommend you set a goal of looking at whatever your key areas of life are that you measure, and set a goal to become more resilient through this period of time. And there's disciplines and habits, and we're going to talk about those in future webinars. But strive for resiliency, not just to get stronger. Resiliency is bounce back capability. Strength is resistance to force. The two are very different. And the strong tend to, you can cause something to crumble and collapse, but if you're adaptable, agile, flexible, recuperate easy, and if you have the protocols for doing that, that's what's needed in times of crisis and times of uncertainty. If you haven't gotten your Clifton Strengths, do so. You can go to Gallup. You can search for it, called Clifton Strengths or the Gallup Strength Finder, or go to the Gallup Strength Center. You have two options. One is $19.95 to get your top 5 strengths, or $49.95 to get your all 34. If you haven't gotten the colored system, the matrix called Core Clarity yet, if you send us your top 5 strengths, we'll send you at no cost a pyramid, a colored pyramid that shows both your leadership archetype, where your dominant recovery zone is, and your 5 strengths. So we'll do that at no cost. If you need a link to the Gallup, we'll send you a prepaid link for that, and we'll just bill you whatever the same cost that it costs Gallup. But it gives us a way to track those. I've attached in the chat, there's a link to a Google Doc. You'll link it. It'll send us a request. We'll give you access. It'll have a sheet called Drain or Gain. It's an exercise. We want you to do the drain or gain and look at activities that you're currently doing that are either energizing to you or draining to you. And then the third piece of that is link it to what strengths are being constrained or drained or being engaged. Some symptoms or signs of a strength being drained is you get bored, you get irritated, you feel pressure and stress. Now, when you're feeling those, and as you get more experience, you'll recognize those, you'll recognize where, and you'll be able to shift yourself and tap into one of your other strengths. Identify your dominant mode of recovery. Is your dominant mode with others? Safe relationships, talking, thinking out loud, being with others in small groups. Is it engaging group experiences? Do you like the energy of being with a group, being on a team? Do you like time alone? There are a lot of people who are enjoying this particular time. I am, because of what? My 3 green strengths. I've picked up a couple days that travel takes away in terms of getting creative time and thinking and developing new content. I love that. I still miss people. I have 1 blue strength. but not so much because I have one blue strength. And I'm staying connected with my close friends. And so I'm working collaboratively. And what I'm trying to do is leverage or build that the people who are close in my circle, I'm trying to find ways we can partner and work together and help each other grow. So that's part of the formula and part of kind of the craft of learning how to leverage your strengths so that I'm not taking on new things by myself, like this studio. I didn't do this by myself. I have a young entrepreneur by the name of Luke Asper, who's an expert at this, who happens to live about 5 minutes away. And we took 5 Saturdays in a row and kind of built different stages. But the great thing, my relator, we're building that relationship together. So I double down on using my strengths and find ways to, leverage them and cross over and use more than one strength. Now, remember, don't think that you have to go find something else to be happy and satisfied in. Strategy one, and if you need help with this, we're happy to help you. But strategy one is, how can I use my strengths where I'm at? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes the boss won't let you, the culture doesn't support it. There are rare occasions when that's the case. But most of the time, you can figure out that you just haven't been doing it by design. You've been doing the job the way somebody else has told you to do it or the way people expect you to do it, not realizing 90% of the time, there's no one particular way, even though it may be written down in procedure. As long as you get it done and you're not violating certain kind of culture codes or whatever, play to your strengths. Learn how to do that. Do this simple exercise. Take your primary responsibilities and activities, and then take your strengths, your top 5 strengths, and with each strength, ask yourself, how is my strength helping me improve in this area? Then ask, how is it getting in my way or holding me back? And then ask, what's one thing I can do to improve that strength? Now, what this is going to do, it's going to make you aware of the things that drain and energize. It's going to make you aware of how to play better to your strengths and how to use your strengths in different contexts. This is one of the most powerful things, exercises that I use with people to help build them and coach them to learn how to do this in real time. And over time, it makes a big difference. So do this exercise. So what's next? Well, one is managing stress through a disaster. So in the next webinar, we're going to be talking about more of the strategies in post-traumatic growth strategies. I'll be posting this outline that we had today in the chat, but I'll also want to encourage you to begin working on this on a daily basis. The research shows this very clearly. Those who play to their strengths on a daily basis are happier, they do better work, they're more satisfied with their outcomes, they're healthier. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is look at how to play to your strengths, know your strengths, grow your strengths, practice them, and then we'll figure out together how to apply them in stressful times. Thank you so much for coming to the webinar. I've recorded this, so we'll share this with you and share what's coming up with friends. They can get the recording and let's do this together. What I'd love for you to do is continue to send questions to us that we can follow up and answer, and also give us topics you might be interested in, because we're going to do this every other week. Maybe not on the same day, but every other week. So stay tuned. Thank you very much. Take care.